History is full of ruins, but every once in a while you find a place that doesn't feel ruined, it feels erased. There's a strange feeling you get when you look at ancient history long enough, and I don't mean the normal kind of curiosity people get from museums or documentaries or old textbooks in school. I mean the feeling that something is wrong. Like the timeline we've been handed is missing pages. Because the deeper you go into the story of human civilization, the more you realize there are moments where things appear out of nowhere. Massive cities. Perfect stone structures. Astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist yet. Entire cultures capable of engineering projects that would challenge modern construction equipment even today. And then, just as suddenly, many of them vanish. Not dramatically. Not with some final battle or giant cinematic collapse. They just stop. Their roads disappear into forests. Their temples sink beneath oceans. Their languages die. Their names become myths. And eventually history turns them into bedtime stories. Atlantis. Lemuria. Hyperborea. Mu. Most people hear those names and immediately think fantasy. Fiction. Ancient conspiracy forums at 3 in the morning. But what's interesting is not whether those places literally existed exactly as described. What's interesting is why almost every civilization on Earth seems obsessed with the same memory. A world before this one. A kingdom swallowed by the sea. A great flood. A forgotten people who knew things modern humanity lost. It's weird, right? Cultures separated by thousands of miles, with no contact, all telling variations of the same story. And maybe that's coincidence. Maybe human beings naturally invent legends about destruction because we fear losing everything we've built. But the problem is, sometimes archaeology makes those stories harder to ignore. Because every few years, buried underneath deserts or jungles or oceans, somebody finds something they weren't supposed to find yet. Stone walls older than civilization itself. Underground chambers with impossible precision. Ancient maps showing coastlines hidden beneath ice. Entire cities submerged hundreds of feet underwater. And every discovery creates the same uncomfortable question. What if human history is older than we think? Not just by a few centuries. I mean dramatically older. What if civilization didn't begin where we think it did? What if humanity has already risen before, and collapsed before, maybe more than once? Tonight, we're going to descend through the Lost Civilization Iceberg. We'll start with the famous stories everybody knows, but the deeper we go, the stranger the pattern becomes. Because eventually this stops feeling like mythology and starts feeling like memory. And somewhere near the bottom of this iceberg, hidden underneath all the legends and ruins and drowned cities, is a possibility that honestly unsettles me more than almost any conspiracy theory I've ever covered. The possibility that humanity is not standing at the beginning of history. We may just be standing in the latest layer of it. The strange thing about ancient civilizations is that the deeper you study them, the less ancient they begin to feel. We like to imagine early humans as primitive people barely surviving against nature, wearing rough clothing, drawing on cave walls, and slowly crawling toward progress one generation at a time. But every so often, history breaks its own rules. You find a site that should not exist yet. A structure too advanced for its age. A society with knowledge that appears centuries before it is supposed to. And once you notice one example, you start seeing them everywhere. Take the ancient city of Caral in Peru. Most people have never even heard of it, which is insane considering it is one of the oldest known civilizations in the Americas, dating back nearly 5,000 years. That means while parts of Europe were still figuring out basic settlement structures, there were already organized cities with massive ceremonial complexes on the coast of South America. Then there is Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, and honestly, this place alone feels like a glitch in the timeline. The site is estimated to be over 11,000 years old. 11,000. To put that into perspective, that predates Stonehenge by thousands of years. It predates the pyramids by even more. According to the standard historical model, humans at this time were supposedly small hunter-gatherer groups just beginning agriculture. And yet buried under a hill were gigantic carved stone pillars arranged in circles with artwork, symbolism, and engineering precision that should not have existed yet. Archaeologists still debate who built it, how they organized labor on that scale, and most importantly, why it was intentionally buried afterward. And that detail bothers me more than anything else. Because ruins usually collapse naturally. Civilizations decay. Buildings weather away over centuries. But this place was carefully covered, almost like somebody wanted it hidden. Then you move to places like Puma Punku in Bolivia, where giant stone blocks fit together with absurd precision despite existing at extreme altitude in the Andes Mountains. Some of these stones weigh multiple tons, and the cuts are so exact that modern engineers still argue over how they were achieved using the tools supposedly available at the time. Again, maybe there are explanations for all of this individually. Maybe every site has its own answer. But once enough of these places start stacking together, a pattern begins to emerge. Human history suddenly stops looking like a straight line and starts looking like fragments. Pieces of something larger. And maybe the creepiest realization is this: we only know about the civilizations that left enough behind to survive thousands of years. Think about how fragile modern society actually is. Servers fail. Cities decay. Power grids collapse. Paper burns. Steel rusts. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, how much evidence of us would still remain after 10,000 years? Probably less than we would like to admit. So when archaeologists uncover traces of impossible structures from the distant past, there is an uncomfortable implication hiding underneath all of it. Maybe ancient civilization is not rare. Maybe losing civilization is what is normal. And maybe history is not the story of humanity rising upward forever. Maybe it is the story of humanity repeatedly forgetting. One of the most unsettling patterns in ancient history is not the civilizations we know disappeared. It is the ones that seem to disappear too quietly. Because when most people imagine the collapse of a society, they picture some dramatic ending. Massive wars. Giant disasters. Fires consuming cities. But history is filled with places where people simply left. Entire populations vanished into the background of time so completely that by the time explorers rediscovered their cities, nature had already begun swallowing them whole. Deep in the jungles of Cambodia sits Angkor Wat, the largest religious complex on Earth. At its peak, the surrounding city may have held close to 1 million people. Think about that for a second. 1 million people living in a highly organized urban environment centuries ago, complete with water systems, road networks, and enormous stone temples carved with impossible detail. And then the civilization faded. The jungle moved back in. Trees wrapped around stone walls like the earth itself was reclaiming the place. When European explorers encountered it centuries later, it looked less like archaeology and more like the ruins of another world. Then there is the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the strangest examples in human history. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had advanced drainage systems, carefully planned streets, standardized construction, and evidence of trade networks stretching for hundreds of miles. They were astonishingly organized for their time. But unlike other ancient empires, there are almost no giant monuments glorifying kings. No obvious signs of massive conquest. And perhaps strangest of all, their writing system still has not been fully deciphered. Imagine an entire civilization speaking to us across thousands of years, and we still cannot understand the language. It feels less like studying history and more like listening to a recording that is too damaged to play correctly. The Maya are another example people misunderstand constantly. Popular culture likes to frame them as some mysterious vanished people, but the truth is stranger than that. The Maya themselves did not disappear entirely. Their descendants still exist today. What vanished were the massive city centers, hidden across Central America, Entire urban environments swallowed by rainforests so densely that modern scanning technology is still uncovering roads and structures beneath the trees. Some estimates suggest there may have been millions more people living there than historians originally believed. Entire landscapes hidden in plain sight for centuries. And honestly, that idea alone bothers me. Because it means humanity can build enormous societies, and within enough time, the planet can make them almost invisible. There is a recurring feeling that starts appearing once you study enough of these places. The sense that civilization is much more fragile than we pretend it is. We think of modern humanity as permanent because our buildings feel solid and our technology feels advanced. But ancient people probably felt exactly the same way standing inside their own cities. They probably thought their roads would last forever too. Their governments. Their monuments. Their names. And now many of those names survive only as fragments in old stories or broken carvings buried under dirt. But there is another detail that keeps appearing in these lost civilizations, and this is where things start becoming genuinely eerie. Across completely different cultures and continents, there are repeated references to a catastrophe. Floods. Darkness. Fire from the sky. Long winters. Entire ages ending. At first, it sounds symbolic. Religious even. Until you realize how many civilizations are telling variations of the exact same memory. And once that pattern begins, history starts feeling less like a timeline, and more like the aftermath of something humanity barely survived. There is a reason flood myths appear in almost every ancient culture on Earth, and no matter how many times I look into it, the pattern never stops feeling strange. Ancient Mesopotamia had the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Bible describes Noah and the Great Flood. Hindu texts speak of Manu surviving a world-ending deluge. Greek mythology tells the story of Deucalion. Indigenous tribes across North and South America preserve stories of rising waters destroying previous worlds. Even isolated Pacific island cultures carry oral traditions describing entire lands swallowed by the sea. And at first glance, you can dismiss this pretty easily. Water is dangerous. Floods happen everywhere. Of course ancient societies would tell stories about them. But then geology enters the conversation and suddenly things become a lot more uncomfortable. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the world looked completely different. Massive glaciers covered huge portions of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today, meaning enormous stretches of land existed that are now underwater. Entire coastlines that ancient humans may have lived on simply do not exist anymore. One of the strangest examples is Doggerland, a now submerged landmass beneath the North Sea that once connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. Thousands of years ago, people hunted there, traveled there, probably built settlements there. Today it sits underwater, invisible except through sonar scans and artifacts dragged up accidentally by fishing boats. Imagine future civilizations discovering traces of modern cities beneath the Atlantic Ocean and trying to piece together what happened to us. That is essentially what we are doing now. Then you have places like Yonaguni near Japan, where divers discovered massive stone formations beneath the ocean surface. Some researchers argue they are natural rock structures shaped by currents and earthquakes. Others believe they may be remnants of human construction from a time when sea levels were lower. And honestly, whether Yonaguni itself is artificial almost does not matter anymore, because the bigger realization remains the same. There are entire landscapes hidden beneath the oceans that humanity has barely explored. We know more about parts of the moon than we do about sections of the seafloor. That is real. And the ocean preserves things in ways land often does not. Which means some of the oldest evidence of human civilization may literally be underwater right now. But the part that really starts pushing this from archaeology into existential territory is what happened during the melting of the Ice Age itself. Scientists believe there were periods where sea levels rose extremely quickly on a geological timescale. Not overnight movie-style floods, but dramatic enough that entire coastlines would have disappeared within generations. Imagine being part of an ancient coastal society watching the ocean slowly consume villages, roads, temples, and graves over decades. Children growing up hearing stories about forests and fields that now exist beneath waves. Over enough time, those memories would stop sounding historical and start sounding mythical. A drowned kingdom. A lost world beneath the sea. Atlantis stops feeling less like a fantasy and more like the distorted echo of something humans collectively experienced. And maybe that is what unsettles me most about all of this. Because if enough catastrophic change happened once before, then the ancient world was not destroyed by monsters or curses or divine punishment. It was destroyed by the planet itself changing around them. Which means civilization is not some permanent victory over nature. It is temporary stability. A thin layer of order built on top of forces much older and much larger than us. And if entire worlds vanished once before, buried beneath rising oceans and forgotten by history, then there is a terrifying possibility hidden underneath all these myths. Maybe humanity does not remember the flood because it was symbolic. Maybe humanity remembers it because somewhere deep in our collective memory, it actually happened. At a certain point in researching lost civilizations, the fear changes. Early on, the mystery feels exciting. Buried cities, ancient maps, forgotten kingdoms beneath the ocean, all of it still feels adventurous in a strange way. But eventually you start running into stories about places beneath the earth itself, and that is where the atmosphere shifts completely. Because humans have always been obsessed with the idea that something exists below us. Not metaphorically. Literally below us. Entire underground worlds appear constantly throughout mythology and history. The Greeks spoke about vast realms beneath the surface. Norse mythology described underground kingdoms filled with ancient beings and hidden knowledge. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, there are references to Agartha, a legendary subterranean civilization said to exist deep within the earth. Even in modern conspiracy culture, stories persist about hidden tunnel systems, underground cities, and entire networks buried beneath mountains and deserts. Most of this is probably mythology mixed with paranoia, obviously. But then reality starts feeding the mythology in ways that are difficult to ignore. Take Derinkuyu in Turkey, for example. An actual underground city capable of sheltering tens of thousands of people beneath the surface. Not a cave. A city. Ventilation shafts, storage rooms, living quarters, wells, defensive passages, entire levels descending deep underground. And Derinkuyu is not alone. Across Cappadocia there are numerous subterranean structures carved into stone, some connected through tunnel systems stretching for miles. Imagine discovering something like that without context. Entire populations once living below the earth while kingdoms rose and fell above them. And again, the same question appears. Why? Some historians believe these underground cities were temporary shelters from invasions or environmental conditions. That explanation makes sense. But emotionally, there is still something deeply unsettling about humanity repeatedly building downward. Especially because the further back you go, the more ancient cultures seem convinced there was knowledge hidden underground. Sacred chambers beneath temples. Tombs sealed for thousands of years. Labyrinths beneath cities. Secret passages beneath pyramids. It is almost like ancient humanity believed the most important things should not remain on the surface. Then you move into places like the Egyptian pyramids, and honestly the feeling only gets stranger. Because despite centuries of study, there is still debate about hidden chambers, unknown construction methods, and possible undiscovered structures beneath the Giza Plateau itself. Modern scans continue finding anomalies underground, empty spaces where something may still exist. And every time archaeologists uncover a new chamber in some ancient structure, the internet reacts the same way. Because people are no longer just looking for treasure or artifacts. They are looking for answers. Proof that there was more to these civilizations than we currently understand. But perhaps the most disturbing realization is not that underground cities existed. It is that many ancient civilizations seemed obsessed with preserving knowledge for some future generation. Stone tablets. Buried vaults. Encoded myths. Massive monuments aligned with stars that would not shift for thousands of years. It almost feels like they expected collapse. Like they knew their world was temporary. And suddenly the image of ancient humanity changes completely. Instead of primitive people stumbling through history, you begin imagining survivors. People trying desperately to preserve fragments of memory before something erased their world. Because if civilization had already collapsed once before, if floods or climate disasters or unknown catastrophes truly destroyed entire societies, then underground structures stop looking mysterious. They start looking practical. Shelters. Archives. Emergency measures built by people who knew the surface world could disappear. And the deeper this rabbit hole goes, the more uncomfortable the pattern becomes. Ancient humanity did not just fear destruction. They seemed to expect it. This is usually the point where discussions about ancient civilizations start getting uncomfortable online, because now we enter the territory people call forbidden archaeology. And I want to be careful here because this part of the iceberg attracts an unbelievable amount of nonsense. Fake artifacts, edited photographs, conspiracy forums convinced every rock formation is proof of aliens. A lot of it falls apart the moment you actually investigate it. But hidden underneath all the exaggeration is something far more interesting. The reality that history is not nearly as complete as we pretend it is. Archaeology is not a perfect reconstruction of the past. It is a puzzle made mostly of missing pieces. We are trying to understand thousands of years of human history through fragments that happen to survive. And every once in a while, somebody finds a piece that does not fit the picture. One of the most famous examples is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. At first glance it just looked like a corroded lump of metal. But after researchers examined it more closely, they realized it was an ancient mechanical device capable of tracking astronomical cycles with astonishing precision. Essentially an analog computer built over 2,000 years ago. And the weirdest part was not just the technology itself. It was how advanced it seemed compared to everything around it. Historians genuinely struggle to explain why something so mechanically sophisticated appears so early and then seemingly vanishes from the historical timeline for centuries afterward. It feels less like technology evolving naturally and more like discovering one surviving fragment from a level of knowledge that mostly disappeared. Then there are the so-called out-of-place artifacts. Ancient objects found in geological layers or locations where they supposedly should not exist. Most of these claims are either misunderstood or outright fake, and honestly a lot of internet theories around them collapse immediately under scrutiny. But even when the exaggerations are stripped away, there are still discoveries that create uncomfortable questions. Ancient maps showing coastlines beneath Antarctic ice. Precision stonework scattered across multiple continents despite cultures having no known contact. Similar flood myths. Similar pyramid structures. Similar astronomical alignments. Again, individually, each of these things can be explained. But collectively they start creating the feeling that ancient civilizations may have shared more knowledge than we currently understand. And maybe the strangest thing about forbidden archaeology is not the discoveries themselves. It is the emotional reaction people have to them. Because whenever somebody proposes a theory outside mainstream historical consensus, the internet immediately splits into two extremes. One side believes absolutely everything. The other dismisses absolutely everything. But reality is usually much more unsettling than either side wants to admit. The truth is that human history changes constantly as new discoveries appear. Entire civilizations have already been added to the timeline within recent decades. Göbekli Tepe alone forced historians to reconsider assumptions about early human society. LiDAR scans are uncovering hidden cities beneath jungles across Central America. Underwater archaeology continues finding submerged settlements near ancient coastlines. We are actively rewriting the story of humanity in real time. And honestly, That should make everyone uneasy. Because if our understanding of the ancient world can shift this dramatically within a single generation, then how much of the timeline is still incomplete? How many civilizations existed in places we have not excavated yet? How many stories were lost because their cities now sit beneath oceans or deserts or forests? At some point, forbidden archaeology stops being about hidden artifacts and starts becoming about a much larger fear. The fear that humanity may not fully understand its own past. And if we do not fully understand where civilization came from, then we probably do not fully understand what caused previous worlds to disappear either. At the very bottom of all of this sits a theory that sounds ridiculous when you first hear it, but the longer you stay inside this rabbit hole, the harder it becomes to completely dismiss emotionally. The idea that civilization does not move in a straight line upward forever. The idea that history is cyclical. That humanity rises, reaches a peak, collapses, forgets, and begins again. Sometimes this is called the civilization reset theory, and to be clear, there is no evidence of some hyper-advanced science fiction society existing exactly the way internet conspiracy forums describe it. No hidden laser weapons buried under pyramids. No ancient airplanes flying around 10,000 years ago. Most of that stuff falls apart quickly. But the core fear underneath the theory is much harder to shake. Because history already proves civilizations collapse constantly. The Roman Empire collapsed. Bronze Age societies collapsed. Kingdoms vanish. Trade networks fail. Knowledge disappears. Entire technologies have been lost before. There are recipes from the ancient world we still cannot perfectly recreate today. Techniques in architecture and engineering that remain partially mysterious. So the real question becomes terrifyingly simple. If enough time passed after a global collapse, how much evidence of advanced civilization would actually survive? Imagine humanity disappeared tomorrow. Not through some dramatic apocalypse movie scenario, just gradually. Infrastructure fails. Cities decay. Nature spreads back over highways and skyscrapers. Within centuries, most modern structures would already begin deteriorating. Within thousands of years, forests and oceans would consume enormous portions of civilization. Metal corrodes. Digital records vanish. Satellites fall from orbit. And after enough time, what would remain? Fragments. Foundations. Strange artifacts buried under layers of dirt. Future archaeologists might discover pieces of our world and completely misunderstand what they were looking at. And honestly, that thought changes the way ancient ruins feel. Suddenly the gaps in history stop seeming unusual. They start seeming inevitable. There is also a deeply uncomfortable coincidence surrounding the end of the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, humanity experienced enormous environmental changes. Flooding coastlines. Shifting climates. Ecosystems transforming rapidly. And interestingly, many ancient traditions place the destruction of earlier worlds somewhere around this distant era of catastrophe. Again, that does not prove some lost super civilization existed. But it does raise a disturbing possibility. What if humanity had already begun organizing into larger societies along ancient coastlines before rising seas erased most traces of them? We naturally assume the oldest surviving evidence is the oldest civilization that existed, but that assumption may be completely wrong. Survival bias controls archaeology. We only find what managed to remain. And if most ancient human populations lived near coastlines, then some of the earliest chapters of civilization may now sit beneath hundreds of feet of water. But what really pushes the civilization reset theory into existential horror? Territory is the psychological side of it. Because modern society views itself as the peak. We believe we are the most advanced humans to ever exist. The culmination of history. The final version. And maybe we are. But every civilization before us probably believed exactly the same thing. The Romans thought their empire would endure forever. Ancient kingdoms carved monuments into mountains believing their names would never disappear. Now tourists walk through their ruins taking photographs while barely remembering who built them. That is the true horror hidden underneath this theory. Not ancient aliens. Not secret underground kingdoms. It is the possibility that civilization is temporary by nature. That humanity repeatedly mistakes temporary stability for permanence. And if previous worlds really did vanish beneath climate shifts, disasters, or societal collapse, then somewhere far in the future another civilization may one day excavate the remains of our cities too, wondering who we were and why we disappeared. Eventually, the iceberg reaches a point where the conversation stops being about lost civilizations entirely and starts becoming about something much stranger. The possibility that humanity may not even be the first intelligent culture to stand on this planet in the way we understand ourselves today. And I know that sounds insane, so let me explain carefully, because this is where a lot of discussions online completely derail into fantasy. There is no scientific evidence for some hidden non-human empire secretly ruling the ancient world. No proof of giant supernatural beings building pyramids or forgotten species hiding underground. But what does exist is a very strange pattern in mythology, one that appears almost everywhere humanity has ever lived. Stories about beings who came before us. Not gods in the modern superhero sense, but ancient teachers, watchers, builders, sky beings, people associated with forbidden knowledge and lost ages. The Sumerians had the Apkallu. Greek mythology described the Titans before the age of man. Hindu cosmology speaks about previous cycles of humanity and beings existing in earlier ages of the world. Indigenous traditions across different continents reference elder races or ancient predecessors connected to catastrophe and renewal. And maybe all of this is symbolic. Honestly, it probably is. Human beings naturally personify the unknown. But the deeper you go into comparative mythology, the stranger the overlap becomes. Different cultures separated by oceans repeatedly describing humanity as inheritors rather than beginnings. As though civilization itself was passed down from something older. Then there is the terrifying timescale problem. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Recorded history covers maybe 5 or 6,000 of those years in any meaningful detail. Civilization as we traditionally define it only occupies a tiny fraction of human existence. Which means there are unimaginably long stretches of prehistory we understand very poorly. Entire eras where populations migrated, adapted, disappeared, and left almost no surviving evidence behind. And honestly, the more I think about that, the more unsettling it becomes. Because we instinctively imagine prehistory as empty. Small tribes scattered across untouched wilderness. But what if that mental image is incomplete? Not in the sense of advanced futuristic technology, but in the sense that human complexity may have emerged and vanished multiple times in forms we no longer recognize. Cultures that organized differently. Thought differently. Believed different things about reality itself. Some researchers even point out that if an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, geological processes alone might erase nearly all evidence of it. Erosion, tectonic shifts, ocean movement, glaciation, all of it slowly grinding the surface of the planet clean over immense spans of time. Again, this does not prove anything. But it creates a horrifying realization. The absence of evidence across deep time is not necessarily evidence of absence. And maybe that is why ancient ruins disturb people so deeply on a subconscious level. Because standing inside those places creates the uncanny feeling that humanity is older than it remembers. Older spiritually. Older psychologically. Like we inherited fragments of stories from worlds that no longer exist. There is also something deeply eerie about how many ancient myths describe knowledge itself as dangerous. Forbidden wisdom. Hidden truths buried underground. Civilizations destroyed after becoming too prideful or too advanced. It is almost as if ancient cultures were trying to warn future generations about something they believed inevitably happens to intelligent societies. And maybe those stories are just moral lessons wrapped in mythology. But after everything we have talked about, after drowned coastlines, vanished cities, buried chambers, forgotten technologies, and civilizations erased by time, I cannot fully dismiss the feeling that humanity may be living inside a much older story than we realize. One where entire worlds existed before ours, faded into myth, and left behind only enough evidence to make future generations wonder if they were ever truly gone at all. The deeper I went into all of this, the harder it became to think about history the same way again. Because eventually you stop seeing ancient civilizations as isolated mysteries and start seeing them as echoes. Fragments of something larger humanity keeps trying to remember. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but think about it for a second. Across every continent on Earth, people built monuments aligned with stars they could barely observe without modern equipment. They carved stories about floods, previous worlds, forgotten ages, and knowledge passed down from older beings. Entire societies disappeared beneath forests, deserts, and oceans, leaving behind only enough evidence to raise questions nobody can fully answer. And through all of it, one idea keeps returning over and over again. Humanity forgets. That may be the real theme hidden underneath this entire iceberg. Not aliens. Not secret rulers. Not mystical lost continents hidden somewhere beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Forgetting. Civilizations disappear, and over enough time their memory transforms into mythology. Real places become legends. Real catastrophes become religious stories. Real people become gods and monsters and cautionary tales. And maybe that process is happening to us right now without us even realizing it. Because modern civilization has developed this incredible confidence in itself. We think information lasts forever now because everything is digital. Every photograph uploaded instantly. Every event archived online. Every location mapped. But honestly, that confidence feels fragile the more you think about it. Most of modern human knowledge exists on systems requiring constant electricity, maintenance, and infrastructure. Entire generations of memories now live on servers humanity assumes will always remain functional. But history suggests otherwise. History suggests permanence is usually an illusion. And maybe that is why ancient ruins feel so emotionally powerful. Standing inside them creates a strange kind of vertigo. You realize people once lived there believing their world mattered just as much as ours does now. They loved, built, studied the stars, created governments, worshipped gods, planned futures, and assumed someone would remember them forever. Then time moved forward and reduced entire civilizations into broken stone foundations hidden beneath dirt. It is humbling in a way that honestly borders on terrifying.